Such a treat to be with you all. Let me get my slides up here. And I hope you can see these. Let me know, anyone, if you can't. It's a treat to also be talking seafood with Dr. Joe Hibbelin in the audience, who's I've not gotten to spend a ton of time with professionally, but has been a big inspiration to me in my career. It's a thrill to be talking about seafood. As a psychiatrist, I'm probably one of the low and early folks who started talking to patients about clams. And let me tell you, that's not what people are expecting to hear from a psychiatrist. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the state of the science of nutritional psychiatry, especially having such a great expertise on all of the other aspects of seafood, like omega-3 fats, prior to me. So quickly, my disclosures: I am not really funded by big farms or big pharma, but I do work with media in terms of trying to promote a lot of the information we know around food and mental health. I am an author, so I'm have a little bit of a bias, and want people to like my recipes and think they're delicious. And all of my books always have seafood in them, because from the very beginning of this, I knew as a young psychiatrist interested in brain health, I had a big problem. I didn't eat seafood, and all the data was coming out about omega-3s, and some of the early research that's been mentioned today really is what inspired me 20 years ago to start thinking about this in a clinical way. And that's really been exciting to watch the field of nutritional psychiatry grow. This notion that when you think about a mental health professional and your own mental health, you don't just need to think about psychotherapy and a long, painful process talking about everything in your childhood, et cetera, or a medication that maybe carries stigma. There's a lot of conversation around how and if they work. So it was exciting to see food start to come up. And then this is Dr. Joe and Felice Jack and Dr. Marnie from Harvard at one of the first, is the first U.S. International Society of Nutrition Psychiatry Research meeting. And you can see how important Dr. Hibbelin is to all of us in terms of just the leadership. And this was just a seminal moment for nutritional psychiatry, the idea that so many of the great researchers around omega-3 fats and seafood and dietary pattern were getting together to talk about it. It's important we talk about it. The mental health crisis is huge in America, no matter what way you frame it. Statistics just coming out in the last, 2 days, that every U.S. American now needs to be under 65, needs to be screened. And I don't know what that people over 65 aren't getting screened. I'm super anxious about that. There's a lot to worry about at that phase of life. So, but these are just quickly some statistics, because I need to burn through my slides quickly, unfortunately. But your brain consumes a lot of fuel. And so when we think about the types of fuels that fuel the brain, we want to incorporate that into treatment, but also into prevention, our own wellness plan. It's not just about staying thin and having heart health and avoiding cancer. The most disabling illness that people are at risk for are mental health conditions. For men, substance use and depression; for women, depression. And these PUFAs, something like 7 to 8% of the dry weight of the human brain is DHA, which most Americans, the only place they're going to find those is seafood. I use this term. We don't have an official definition. I'm not sure who would do that. So this has been my official definition for a couple of years now, with this notion that 5 out of 5 of us have a human brain. And I want everyone to be thinking about their mental health and how to care for their mental health with food. So using nutrition to optimize brain health and to treat and prevent mental health disorders. My most recent book had the power players. And again, it's maybe a bold thing to want people to buy your book and also eat anchovies, but that's my hope. That's the burden that I've chosen to carry. And the hope, again, is not to say these are the only foods that you need to eat, but to help patients think about, wow, I'm struggling with depression and anxiety. I'm at the grocery store. What can I do? What can I buy? What is within my power to learn about, or at least begin to engage in, is a part of the path to healing. Nutrition became more interesting to psychiatry, really, because of a lot of leaders in the field and part of the International Society of Nutrition Psychiatry Research. 2015 is when things start to pop up, and we begin to see the new concepts in mental health, really how we begin to evolve out of serotonins and just SSRIs. Really helpful to lots of patients. I know there's controversy around that right now, but still a helpful tool. But one of the reasons SSRIs and food and exercise and psychotherapy are helpful to us in our mental health is they put our brain into a state of growth and learning. That's what the brain does. It grows and connects. And seafood is a huge part of that. You see all the seafood in my drawings, so I'm subtly trying to hint to everyone who reads. These are some illustrations from the most recent book, but everyone who reads the books, start thinking about that. that these aren't like icky fish. This is like stuff that the human brain evolved from. One of the headwinds to our brain growth, we all know, is inflammation, and this notion that as we've shifted our fatty acid intakes, we've shifted how our system responds to inflammation. And this is really seminal work to help people understand. This is data that and ideas that have existed for a long time in mental health, but it's not what patients are often getting. And the goal of nutritional psychiatry is to help individuals incorporate these lifestyle changes as they think about their mental health and eat more seafood. Also, with the microbiome, not as related to seafood, but interestingly, is certainly this other new concept that eating fermented foods is and eating more plants is certainly part of regulating inflammation. In fact, all of these come to dietary recommendations. This is now 6 years old. And so it's interesting. There's so many families and individuals struggling with depression right now, but this isn't sort of, I would say, common knowledge. Hey, if you're maybe seeing some headwinds, experiencing some stressors, double down on these dietary rules, none of which are really surprising, right? Eat your traditional diet. I want to talk quickly about the data because there's been a lot of it, but just to start, we begin with these correlational studies. This is one of my favorites, one of the largest 10,000 university students in Spain. It follows those students over 4.5 years. That's what we like in a prospective trial, and finds that there's a reduction in risk for the individuals in the top half of the Mediterranean diet in terms of their Mediterraneanness. And so a suggestion, no matter how they model the numbers, that if you eat a more traditional diet in college, you prevent depression, which would be wonderful for our public mental health. When you look at these correlational studies together, you see about an 18.2% reduction overall in this meta-analysis, at least, suggesting if more traditional style diets, many of which have a lot more seafood than what Americans eat and what the Western diet has, seem to prevent depression. This then leads into these randomized trials, of which there have been now 6, if you count one that was unintentional. The strongest and first was Felice Jacka's seminal paper, the SMILES trial. It looked at 67 individuals, most in treatment with clinical depression, and compared 7 nutritional individual counseling sessions with a dietitian versus a befriending protocol. They found the number needed to treat here was 4.1, meaning that clinically, I just talked to 4 people about the Mediterranean diet who have depression, I get 1 better. You compare that to some of the other evidence or medications on a depression protocol, and you see number needed to treat like 10. So it's a really powerful finding. A third of patients go into full remission, or anyone who's in the depression treatment world, that's what we're after, and that's a big number. This is followed by the Healthy Med trial by Natalie Parletta and her group. A larger trial, 152 patients. We're seeing, again, some of the rumors, right? Some of the questions. Hey, can patients in a mental health setting change their diet? It's kind of stigmatizing we ask that, but there's a lot of executive function and motivation and energy issues with depression. But both studies find, yes, you can. And then we often think about depression or integrative interventions as, these for mild depression. And that's really a false assumption, right? And a false idea. These are patients right here with severe depression, and helping individuals with severe depression and severe mental illness have great self-care is really, really good and important work. Also note these changes are sustained. Right? So we don't get patients all the way into remission, but we go from on the edge of hospitalization to doing a lot better, cooking and eating a lot better. The next randomized trial doesn't even have like in-person intervention. It's really an interesting trial. I'm sure many of you know it. Heather Francis and her group in Kai Lim. This is the first trial ever published to show that you can get teens to change their diet and it improves their mood. This was just a 13-minute video that they showed teens saying, I've been trying to see the video and Heather won't let me yet. So Heather, if you see this, please. But guessing, they say, hey, eat a Mediterranean diet. It's good for your mental health. You're kind of down. They all had really bad eating habits too. And then they gave them a little food hamper and with olive oil and nuts butter. You'll see in a study in a second one, they gave tinned fish to teens, which is like my favorite intervention ever. And these are in their own words, right? These are the first studies to show that teens with elevated depression symptoms can engage in and adhere to a diet intervention, and then it improves symptoms of depression. This is not how we think about teens, which again is another assumption we should challenge. This is what happens to them. This is in the first 3 weeks of college. I mean, I'm got a bunch of patients right now who are in that situation, and they're doing great, but their mood is not doing this usually. Sometimes. So just again, interesting and strong finding, and then followed up most recently, just last month, Jessica Bays and Janet Schloss and David Sibrett published the AMEND trial. This is looking at depression in young men, and again, challenging this notion. All 100% of the young men change their diet and make it more Mediterranean. They give them tinned fish and olive oil and a food hamper as well. They just had 2 sessions with nutritionists. And this small improvement in the MIDAS, it's a reasonable. They go up 8 points in the MIDAS from a 3 to about 11, their Mediterranean-ness of their diet. And that leads to a 20-point decrease in their back depression inventory scale. So it's just a huge study. So how does all this brain food work? There are a lot of different mechanisms, right? Mental health is not as simple as like we plug up a serotonin receptor and it's all good. There's a lot going on. We all know that. But food has a very, very powerful effect. These are the 9 that kind of stick out to me as someone who's been doing this for a while. The last 3 being, the food SIBO effect, this idea of wanting to indoctrinate people into a cult of brain food. There, I said it publicly, and get people to eat more clams. But to give patients in mental health settings more of a sense of empowerment and more things they can do every day. We've done that in our clinic, we have a small digital clinical group to trying to answer just some simple questions. Besides the notion of, blueberries and wild salmon, what else are brain foods and how do we define those? How can we start thinking about nutrient density with patients beyond caloric density? And how can we change dietary patterns? We've developed a number of e-courses and trained several hundred clinicians on simple ideas, right? French fries are okay, right? But better oven-baked sweet potato fries where you're taking in olive oil, rosemary, and sweet potatoes. So these are some of the simple swaps and some of the tools that a lot of us employ. Actually, simple swaps was like this was one of the handouts that the men in the AMEND trial got. We also published Laura Lachance, a Canadian psychiatrist, asked this question, which brain foods? And so we developed a very brief nutrient profiling system that we looked through the literature. This is back in 2017. Hey, what nutrients have significant evidence that they impact the treatment and prevention of depression? And unlike a lot of nutrient profiling systems, we just said, like, what foods have the most of these per 100 calories? We didn't ding foods for, sodium or cholesterol or saturated fats. We just looked at whole foods, and we found this list. And the key to nutrient profiling systems, as we learned, is to group these foods, right? That's why bivalves become so important. This idea that if you don't like clams, but you like mussels, awesome. If you don't like kale, we can still be friends. I had a kale problem. I like Swiss chard and collards now, all the greens I like, but we want to encourage patients to think broadly and diversely about these food categories and help them go from this notion like magnesium is great for our mental health to really encouraging clinicians and patients to know where you find magnesium. Right? Vitamin E, incredible. Omega-3 fats, incredible. But that's generally led people just to supplements and not to actual foods. And I know I'm going to run out of time here, but just quickly to talk about seafood, since here we are at a seafood conference. Every talk I give, I show this slide and talk about Stephen Cunnane. And I remember running this by Joe when I met him, making sure like this is a wild idea that's out there. Is this true? This notion that our brain, the human brain, evolved in this milieu of minerals and omega-3 fats, and that the Rift Valley, the grasslands of Africa, were a shoreline. So it's a really exciting notion. I like sharing this with patients as I share the notion of nutrient density and thinking about these nutrients, and that 6 oysters is just 60 calories, and look at all the brain nutrition you get. That's really when I look at the seafood categories, the food categories that I want to help a lot of patients with, if it's within their values, and the ones I generally am recommending, it's seafood. Because if you look at what people are missing in the Western diet, they're missing plants and seafood and fermented foods. Period. I mean, and if you can really replace processed food meals, the SMILE trial had people drop 20 processed food meals. What do those omega-3 fats do? I think it's also important to tell patients, hey, your brain cells are made of this stuff. And when there's more of it in there, they work better. There's this idea of neuroplasticity. More omega-3 fats seem to signal more BDNF production. I think that's good. So getting a little jazzed up about this has become part of my clinical technique. I hope some of this data helps you see some of the excitement of nutritional psychiatry, some of where it came from and where it's going a little bit, and the continued importance of seafood in public mental health. There's increasing evidence we can get our brains into a brain grow mode, that it's not all over for me at 48, that, I got some neural connections and new brain cells just waiting to be born if I do things right. To remember clams, I think I was the first nutritional psychiatrist to recommend to an esteemed group like this pasta vongole. Dr. Hibbelin might have taken that claim from me, but I hear he's retiring. So, and thank you all. I hope these lessons help you think about your mental health. And if you are in any way struggling, think about your mental health and how food, maybe it's not everything you need, but it's certainly a foundation of what you need. The Brain Food Clinic, our clinician group, is just wonderful. If we can be of help, we have a new e-course coming out, Healing the Modern Brain. This is the most recent book. And if you're a clinician, we have the only real nutritional psychiatry clinical training. Is a 10-hour clinical training that's online. And then I'm on Instagram too much. So if you want to hang out, DM me or follow me, that is unfortunately the way to my heart. But thank you all so much. Thank you, Kep and Joe. It's been a treat to be your colleague. And thank you everyone for all you do to promote seafood and to promote the education around seafood and to keep fighting the good fight for American public health. Take care.